Welcome to Deepgram's Voice of the Future podcast, also known as Our Favorite Nerds. At Deepgram, we're obsessed with voice, and this podcast is our exploration of the exciting emerging world of voice technology. I'm your host, Sam Zegas, VP of Operations at Deepgram, and today we have a very special episode on deck. We're talking with Scott Stevenson, Deepgram's very own co-founder and CEO, and with Nick Martin, who is a product manager at Deepgram who focuses on our speech-to-text products. Great to have you both.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. Awesome intro.
Thanks, Scott. So our topic today is the recent release of OpenAI's Whisper model. Last week was a big week for speech intelligence as OpenAI released Whisper, which is a general purpose speech recognition model. So we've got several questions about what this means for the future of voice AI, and we wanted to share our thoughts with you. And I'm going to start with Scott here. Let's just cover some of the basics. Who is OpenAI? What's their deal?
Yeah, so OpenAI has been around a while, actually, sort of similar timescale to Deepgram. It was, back in the first like real Silicon Valley boom of AI when they got funded, but essentially what they are is they're a they have a nonprofit and they have a for-profit arm, but it's a research organization where their goal is to, or at least their stated goal is to find new things in the AI world and then release them to the world in a safe way. And so they're behind GPT-3 and DALL-E and other things, and of course now OpenAI Whisper, where they've brought speech to text they've open source speech to text and brought that to the world now. But yeah, they're an awesome research institution that has some of the best people in the world working on the most frontier problems like general AI and all sorts of other things.
That's great. Yeah, I know that what they've done with releasing Whisper is really an achievement. So congrats to their team for that. It's cool to see them working in this space. What do we know specifically about the Whisper product that they released last week?
Yeah, so they wrote a blog post about it, they wrote a paper about it, and then they released code in a model. And the general idea is that what Whisper does is it's an open source speech to text model, and it's a modern one. There have been open source speech to text like frameworks in the past that researchers have used, like Caldi and others that date back even further. But this one is the most recent one that has been released by anybody, that has, and it also has like a pretty good accuracy and punctuation and that kind of thing. But it's a speech to text model. It's, you put in audio and then words come out the other side, and they use a more modern approach to doing that speech to text method. And one thing that they targeted here with this release is AI researchers that are studying. I think the exact quote is robustness, generalization, capabilities, biases, and constraints of the current model. So anyway, they sort of release it out there for people to use and to test the general areas of efficacy for it. And in general, like what I think, and I think everybody at Deepgram thinks is this is awesome for the market. It's an end-to-end deep learning way based, like it's a way of thinking about the speech to text problem that a lot of people were thinking in the past previously, and the end-to-end way of solving speech to text problems has been something that we've been working on at Deepgram ever since we started. And it's awesome to see other people that are very well noted in the market and known, to be putting out a similar approach. And I like it. I see people. I see new people coming to the speech to text market that are they didn't necessarily believe that things were good yet. But now that the same people, OpenAI, that brought GPT-3 to the world, they brought DALL-E to the world, now they're bringing Whisper to the world, like, hey, this got a whole new level of attention that, wait a minute, there's something going on in speech here in the end-to-end deep learning world that OpenAI is paying attention to it and releasing things into the world. So for us, we've been working on that for a long time and bringing it to companies so that they can build applications, voice applications on top of an end-to-end deep learning way to do speech to text, but not just speech to text, to do other things like detect how many speakers there are, what language is being spoken, all sorts of other things. Yeah, so it's really awesome to see the new attention that's come into the market around this.
One final question to build on that with you, Scott, is what does this release tell you about the state of speech technology today? Is voice AI becoming more mainstream? Is that what you see here?
Yeah, it's another milestone. I think it was only a matter of time until a pretty good speech recognition system was released for free into the wild. I think it's important to look back at the first time this was done for an end-to-end deep learning model was back in like 2015, 2016 era for images, and this is around ImageNet and other things like that, and a whole bunch of image companies came up around that, and a lot of progress was made in different areas like security and self-driving cars and all sorts of things around images. And then a few years later, the large language models came out, so GPT and other things around it, which is one thing that OpenAI released, and lots of progress was made there. And now a new end-to-end deep learning model has come out from OpenAI in the speech world, and they're not crazy for releasing it at this time. Like, now is the right time for that to happen. There's so much happening in the world, and people want to build voice products all over the place. And so now it's just the right place at the right time to release this kind of thing. And so anyway, yeah, I look at it as a huge validation of the market. The market is hungry for a new solution, and it's something that we've seen for a long time, and now we see like the mainstream market coming in and wanting to utilize these types of models and techniques. I also think it'll be pretty table stakes soon, like good accuracy in speech to text will be table stakes soon, and like good punctuation, that kind of thing. The thing that's going to matter are, what about all the other things on top of it? Are the word timings good? Can you detect which language they're speaking? What about sentiment analysis? What about summarization? What about translation? What about all these other things on top of it? And so it kind of marks a new milestone in the world for speech. One thing it doesn't solve yet, though, is the speed side. So this is a research model. It takes a very long time to do the transcription to the level that it's able to do it. And the speech market, the voice market, there are billions of people in the world that need things, that need speech to text to run their voice through it and control things and that kind of thing. And a slow model doesn't get you there, basically. So there's a lot more work that has to be done in the open source world in order to take advantage of, in order for users to take advantage of speed. But the commercial world, the speed is already there. So there already are end-to-end deep learning models that are fast that you can utilize, that are very Whisper-like. And so there's still more to go, but it's a big milestone.
Yeah, the thing that excites me most, really tying into what you said there, is that it's just going to bring a lot more people into the ecosystem who will then realize how much is possible if you start testing with a system like Deepgrams, which is really built for products that scale massively, as opposed to a research-oriented solution.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, people thought this is never going to happen. We always have these voice systems released, and there's a whole bunch of hype around it, and then they never work, right? That's just been the trope for forever. But that's like not going to be true anymore. Like, these models are getting really good, and so they actually will work now, and there's going to be an explosion because of it.
Yeah, great. Nick, let me bring you in here. I know you've done a lot of analysis of this product. What are the strengths of the Whisper product?
Yeah, I think, to echo some of what Scott said, the open source nature of it, I think specifically for researchers, this is a great head start for folks that want to start to look at how these model architectures can be applied to this space and get a peek behind the curtains of what a modern end-to-end deep learning architecture looks like for speech to text. So I have no doubt there'll be, a flood of PhD students rushing off to kind of pick this thing apart and hopefully accelerate their thesis if they're in the midst of that. So I think that's one of the big benefits of what Whisper's done there, I think. And again, on the accuracy part, as a getting started, I have a idea. I want to spend 15 minutes doing a quick demo. You can do that, as long as the audio is not too big. But small audio, you can get started very quickly and get pretty good accuracy for the main languages, for kind of the top maybe 5 or 6 languages in the world. So I think those are really the 2 big advantages I see that Whisper has with open sourcing what they did. So.
Yeah, and I know that you're not only familiar with Whisper, but obviously very intimately familiar with what Deepgram is capable of. What are the differences that jump out to you between the 2 products side by side?
Yeah, so I think, again, to go back to sort of Whisper being built primarily for researchers, it's a great thing for researchers, but if you're running, Scott has alluded to, sort of these massively scaled products like what Deepgram customers do, a lot of the you don't get to make a lot of the trade-offs that you get on the open source side of Whisper. You've got to be fast, you've got to be accurate, you've got to have a robust collection of capabilities around that core speech to text that people want to use to build businesses on. So I think that's kind of the big main difference between what Deepgram is doing and what Whisper's made available. The other thing to remember is Whisper is just code. So, you can download it and run it from a CLI and kind of hope for the best on your local machine. But, sort of businesses need APIs, they need graphical user interfaces, GUIs for people to be able to use. There's a lot of interface issues there that you don't get with just a code base. So I'd say that. And then one of the other big pieces that I think of is Whisper's got one great model that they've open sourced, and what we see from our customers are, when you get into a business scenario with this, the audio doesn't look like what you get off the internet. It often needs to be customized or enhanced with experts around language and how, sort of everything that goes into creating a custom model for speech to text. So that's one of the big things that we see from our customer base that you're just not going to get with something like Whisper. And then a lot of the features that we mentioned, word timings, keyword boosting, these things that you have to have encountered a lot of customer use cases to sort of tease out the additional features that you need to make something like this work, in real time, kind of at scale. So those are the big differences. It's sort of research versus, I need to run a $1 billion business off of a voice intelligence platform.
Yeah. I think another obvious thing there is Realtime is not supported by Whisper right now. And probably won't be for a while, but nevertheless, so if you need to do food ordering, or you need to do real-time agent assist, or you need to do something like that, if you wanted to even attempt to do that, you'd have to hack the system to try to do some weird semi real-time kind of thing. So that's always a challenging problem, is not just getting the model working at all, but getting it working in real time in a scaled load scenario and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think those are all great points, Nick. And I think the point about building a business on top of it is probably one of the most salient ones. It's a great way to get a demo going. It's a great way to see how the system works. But if you install it and try to run something, you'll go download an hour or 2 hour long file and try to put it in there, and then it will just, it'll break, right? Because it's too long. It's like, well, maybe your audio files are long, right? Or you do get something going, like a 10-minute file or whatever it is, and it takes 20 minutes for it to transcribe, and you're like, whoa, this is a lot of processing time just to transcribe this one 10-minute file. And so, but if you're doing this, if you're putting it into a demo scenario, so for instance, say that you were building a podcast search engine as a demonstration or something like that, and you wanted to just use the transcription from this to to transcribe like podcast snippets or something, like the first 10 minutes of a podcast, and just to show like how a system would work, then this will totally work. In the background, you could transcribe those 10 files with it. You can set up a static thing. You can show people like, hey, look, this works. And you don't have to go out and find a provider to do that transcription for you. But once you start to say like, hey, I have 100 files, I have 1,000 files, I have 1,000 files a day, I have whatever, then it's a totally different beast, because it is a slow model. It doesn't support many different things that you would like long files and that kind of thing. And so you just have to balance that. It's really good for that researcher that's trying to figure out how these types of systems work, or if you're just building like a demo and want to get something going.
Yeah. Another thing that jumps out at me is that at Deepgram, we're focused a lot on research and development around next generation features, specifically in the understanding bucket. So these are our tools that would allow users to mine insights from speech beyond just the transcript of what was spoken. So you might think in this bucket of things like sentiment analysis, summarization, topic detection. Scott, I'm curious, how does Whisper compare to Deepgram on the understanding front?
I mean, the Whisper doesn't have much understanding in it, and I don't mean like the model can't transcribe well because it can't understand or something like that. At Deepgram, what we mean, understanding is a different category of task. So speech to text is, what are the words that are people saying, and what's the transcription to that, and what are the word timestamps that those happened at, and that kind of thing. That's what transcription is. But from an understanding perspective, you have things like sentiment analysis, summarization, automatic language detection, translation, speaker diarization, speaker ID, just getting speaker count, how many people were there, all sorts of things like that. So these are all things that, like, if you had let's just say like you had a meeting and there were several people in that meeting, if you just had like a smart observer, just a person, listening to that meeting, they would be able to tell you the words that were said. They would be able to tell you the topic. They'd be able to tell you, at what point in the conversation are they? Is this, small talk and that kind of thing in the beginning? They would be able to tell you if anybody got pissed off during that time. They would be able to, a smart human would be able to tell you these things. And this is what we think about when we think about a voice API, an AI-based voice API. It should be able to do those things. It should be able to tell you the words, should be able to tell you the number of speakers, who's speaking when, all sorts of things like that. And so this other understanding side, this non-speech to text side, there's not very much coverage on the Whisper side. There's no speaker diarization. You don't know how many speakers are speaking. You don't know in the recording, if it's 10 minutes long and there's 3 different people, it's not broken out by like utterance of person. So you can do like some NLU, like conversational based NLU on top of it. You can't do things like that. And so the sentiment analysis doesn't do it at all. Translation capability, there's some there, but pretty much every other thing there isn't. And so yeah, it's a research model that was put out to show people how a modern end-to-end deep learning speech to text system works. But it's kind of like you get water through the pipes and you get a pretty good model and then you release it, but it is not filled out. It's not it's not a complete house that you can go live in. So
Yeah, continuing on that theme of what people will experience once they have committed to using it, or they're getting a little bit further into their testing even. Deployment options are something that we build a lot of flexibility into at Deepgram, and I'm wondering, Nick, if you can tell us more about deployment options in one versus the other.
Yeah. So with Whisper, it's just code. So, if you're running on your local machine, you're going to have to install and kind of fight your way through dependencies and making sure you have the right versions of things and, all that exciting stuff. And then you're able to use just a command line interface for it. There's currently not an API wrapped around Whisper that you'd be able to use after you go get it off their GitHub repo. So it's very limited, but if you're up for that challenge, it's very exciting. And that's really it. So I think the difference between what you're able to get on the Whisper side and on the Deepgram side are really just night and day. I mean, Deepgram's got cloud offering, virtual private cloud. We do on-prem deployments. We've got GUI you can go into and play around with, transcribing your own voice as you speak into your microphone. It's, it's really just a chasm between the two from a deployment standpoint. So yeah, that's kind of how that shakes out. And then really the other piece on, deploying is one thing, but maintaining and keeping something alive is quite another. So Deepgram, I mean, we've got a wonderful customer success team. We've got a developer relations team. We do documentation. There's all sorts of community resources out there for what Deepgram provides. And obviously you're not going to get any of that with some code running on your Mac.
Right.
Yeah, I can also give an idea here about like the models that we already have at Deepgram. So we've had end-to-end deep learning based models at Deepgram since the beginning. So 6 years ago, and released into production over 4 years ago. And the architecture that Whisper is, which is this type of encoder decoder type model, and utilizing attention and that type of thing. We've had a model like that in production for over a year. And so if you want to, try out Whisper and look at your word error rate analysis there, and then try out Deepgram's enhanced model. We have two tiers. We have a base model and we have an enhanced model. The enhanced model is the one that would be the most modern version. And if you were to try that, then you'll see like, oh, wait a minute, this is a lot faster, but also the outputs are similar or better in Deepgram compared to Whisper. And by the way, I get word timings, and by the way, I can add on sentiment analysis and all these other things on top of it. So yeah, there is a pretty big difference there. And all of that can be done in the cloud. It can be done. You can talk to us to run Deepgram on-prem, as Nick mentioned. You could run it in your own AWS VPC, like whatever it is, in order to keep data secure, for whatever reasons you want to do that. So it's already been this type of model has already been in production in the world, available from a commercial provider for over a year. And you get all the support and documentation and all that stuff that comes along with it.
When it comes to using a model like Whisper in production, I think the Whisper team itself has said this is really intended for people who are AI researchers first and foremost. Scott, you've talked about how the model is slow. I assume that can lead to high costs in addition if people are trying to use this at scale.
Yeah, and to give an idea on that, if you sent an hour-long file to Deepgram, you would get it back in like 30 seconds. Like the transcription happens like ridiculously quickly, and that is using the latest and greatest enhanced models that are similar in architecture to Whisper. But if you were to download, install Whisper, and then try to do an hour-long file, first of all, it would fail because of the time limit thing. But even if it didn't, it still would take generally longer than the length of the file to do the transcription. So you're talking about at least like 100 times slower to do it that way. And so it's not just a little bit slower. It's not 10-20% slower, 3x slower, something like that. It's 100x slower. I mean, we're talking 2 orders of magnitude here. But if you were to try to run that, like, say, hey, we're going to take this open source thing and we're going to go get GPUs in AWS and stand it up so that we can transcribe a lot, you're going to be paying like way more than, it doesn't matter if it's Deepgram, Google, AWS, anybody, you're going to be paying way more if you do that than if you just use those providers already. And you may or may not get better accuracy when you're doing that with Whisper. We've done a lot of testing, and for real world use case testing, our enhanced models have on average always been better, and our base model is similar to what the Whisper model does. So it's not a good idea to take it to massive scale production. You're going to be paying through the nose for the AWS costs and that kind of thing. So
yeah, that really makes it impractical for a certain kind of use case for someone who's evaluating the tool. Scott, what else do we know about Whisper under the hood, the fundamental architecture of the product that maybe leads to some of that slowness or to the higher cost?
Yeah, so yeah, there's a paper out. People can go read it and learn about the underlying architecture. It's the architecture has something to do with the speed, but end-to-end deep learning models can be fast. So Whisper is an end-to-end deep learning model, and Deepgram is an end-to-end deep learning speech model. We've already proven that it can be way faster. So it's not so much the architecture design, but although that has something to do with it, but there's just a lot of research that has to go into how do you stage how the data flows to the model, how do you batch things together, how do you pass state from one batch to the next, how do you get many GPUs working in concert with many models. So for instance, like if you use Whisper right now, you'd be stuck with one model. You could only use one model for any given runtime at that moment. For Deepgram, you could send 30 different audio files with 30 different models, and all of those work at the same time. And so, like, how do you make all of that work, et cetera? And so there's a lot of research engineering and engineering work that has to go in order to make these models extensible, fast, adjustable, et cetera. And so I don't know, it's kind of the difference between building like a fully featured car at a factory, and it's been, all of the things have been worked out, all the details have been worked out already. Or if you, like build a really fast go-kart in your garage, they can have a similar 0 to 60 time, right? But okay, where's the air conditioning, right? Where are the other four seats for the other people? Where's the whatever? So there's just a lot of decisions that have to be made around that. And this is why when we keep saying over and over, like, hey, this is for researchers, well, that's part of it. They're researching architectures. They're not researching necessarily how fast they can inference the model and that kind of thing. That's the type of research that we do in order to bring this as a commercial product to the world. But yeah.
Yeah, really interesting points there. And maybe Nick, I'll give you the last say on this. Some of the people listening to this podcast might be evaluating Whisper, maybe against Deepgram or against other options that they have out there in the market. Fundamentally, how far can Whisper take you?
I think the answer to that is not very far. I think if you're heading down the path of evaluating vendors that offer capabilities like what Deepgram does, then you've sort of already self-selected out of the Whisper group of people, I think. So, if you're doing research or you're just toying around on a demo, you're building that go-kart in your garage, have at it, make it go 0 to 60 and, hit the streets with that thing and see what happens. But, when you need seat belts and airbags and turn signals and stuff like that, to extend that analogy a bit more, that's when you come to, a place like Deepgram. So I would just say, I would recommend not building a business around Whisper, of any scale really. And I think, in terms of other things that won't get you very far there is that, typically, you want to be able to interact with, an API that handles concurrent connections and does all sorts of fun things around sending models back and forth. That's not going to be there for you. Like all those other features that we talked about with diarization and, word timings, all that's not going to be there for you. So I'd say you're not going to get very far, but depending on what you're looking to do, have a shot at that go-kart.
Yeah.
We'll see you when you're ready to hit the road,
Yeah. There's a lot of things to learn there. So like, I think it kind of depends on who you are and what you're trying to do with it. So if you're like a really young, like, or, early in career or early in stages, like technical founder, and you haven't even like registered your company as like a real company yet, and and you're just you're just playing around and trying different things, like, yeah, definitely install this, like get things running. Pay your tuition is how I like to think about it. Like get the feeling of what it's like to use that kind of system. Then go install Google's SDKs and use Google and do it for Deepgram and like just get the feeling of how all of these things work, because they all kind of seem like they do the same thing on the outside. Like, hey, they just convert audio into text, right? but there is a drastic difference depending on what your actual use case is and what you're trying to do. There's batch mode ways of using it. There's real-time ways of using it. Again, if you have a real-time use case, like, you can't do this at all, right? So you have to feel it out. So, but if you're in that mode of thinking, like, go ahead, right? Like, that's great. You're paying your tuition, you're learning more about the different areas of speech here. But when you need to get to, hey, we've got 100 live streams that we need, and we need them always working all the time, and we need to pay a reasonable price for that, and our investors are on us because we're paying too much for AWS or whatever to do that. Like, you can get around all of that by just using like a service provider to provide these things. But if you want to learn about how to rack up like a big AWS bill, or like whatever it is, like, this is a really good way to do it, and learn about trying to distribute things to slow systems and whatnot. It's a really good way to do it. But or to try to speed it up, if that's the kind of thing that you like, try to speed up this model. But anyway, so it can teach you about a lot. In a very similar way, any tech startup, you could think about it that way. You could say, hey, why don't I go buy my own machines and go to a data center and put everything inside there, and I want to install the CPUs, and I want to install the hard drive and the memory and the whatever, and I want to see what that is all like. And there's utility in that. There really is utility in that kind of thing. But if your company is taking off and you just need compute scale, is sometimes having your own data center is a really good idea. Many times it's not. And so going with AWS or Google or something like that to scale your compute is a really good idea, right? Well, it's a similar thing now in the world with AI cloud. And it's not necessarily Google or AWS. It's other companies that are in the tech space and the image space and the audio space, et cetera, that are younger companies, that are startups, but that are, strategic infrastructure level providers. And those are the ones that you want to use for that type of thing. So, yeah.
Scott, you've been an inventor and a thought leader and an entrepreneur in speech technology for the better part of a decade now. And given this release of Whisper, I'm curious, what do you think this means for the next 10 years of voice out in the wild as people will encounter it?
Out in the wild is going to be wild. I think the I think at night, think of the difference. Well, maybe not everybody can think of this difference. I can, at least, between like 1995 and like 2005. Like, that's what's going to happen over the next decade for AI and voice products and that kind of thing. 1995 was just like really kind of the birth of the internet. People like, hey, I heard that there's some way that you can possibly dial in through your dial-up modem to get into this thing, and people are first starting to experience it. Then, a few years later, it starts to become really big, late 90s or early 2000s. But then by 2005, like, real applications had been developed at massive scale already, right? And it's just going to be a very similar thing. And actually, I think it will be accelerated. So the 10 years that it took for that to happen is probably only going to be like 3 or 5 years for the AI side of that to happen. And so, like, the next 5 years will be massive adoption. Like, I think by 10 years from now, people will not be afraid to call centers anymore because they think it's going to waste their time. Like, I think that would be a drastic change in our lives, because we'll be like, no, I want to call a call center because that's going to be the fastest way to solve my problem. I can just talk in natural language to probably a bot, that just solves my problem for me, And so we're going to have like really big behavior changes in our car. We're going to start talking to our cars a lot more, we're going to be talking to our phones a lot more. And rather than just texting and typing on a screen and that kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot more coming up. And also, this is all like, US and Europe, and they're definitely going to see all of these things, and a lot of Asia is going to see this. But there are lots of other parts of the world where people do not type, do not read and write, and voice is going to enable them to communicate and actually take part in what is happening in the world. And it's already starting to happen. So we're going to see like global population participating in a voice-based and text and other images and that kind of thing, but like an AI kind of operating system in the world. And so I'm this is just the beginning. It's there's a lot of exciting things to come. And I'm, I think it's a really exciting time to be working in this field, to be doing anything in AI, fundamental AI right now, but especially in voice, because it's kind of one of the last ones to crack. It's like one of the hardest problems essentially, but now it's actually starting to become really, really good. And then we're going to see this massive unlocking of like our primary means of communication as humans. So we have a lot of fun that's going to happen over the next 10 years.
I couldn't agree more. The future of voice technology is a really exciting space to be in right now, and the next 5 to 10 years are going to be really, really interesting. Scott, Nick, awesome to talk to you today. Thanks for sharing all of your insight.
Of course.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
So to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. If you want to test Deepgram and Whisper, you can do both through the Deepgram API. Get free access at console.deepgram.com, along with docs and other resources for getting started. And don't forget to follow us on all of our socials. That's Deepgram AI. So with that, we're out. Catch you next time.